Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, and here I am on Campden Hill Road in Holland Park, London. Behind me you can see that blue plaque, green door, bluish green door, turquoise would it be? That's where Sir Henry Newbolt lived for much of his adult life. So he's best known for being a poet, he composed Vitae Lampada, as in the lamp of life in Latin, although the poem's actually in English. I don't see why he couldn't have called it an English title. There's a better known expression in Latin. He published numerous other poems, a few volumes of verse. He wrote a play, Mordred, which is about the Arthurian legend. He published a number of novels. They're often historical ones. He was fascinated by the age of sail, and indeed by the modern Royal Navy, well, modern in his time. He died in 1938, writing factual books about the First World War submarine and anti-submarine. Anyway, so Newbolt was born in the West Midlands, Bilston, a small town. There's Bilston Grange Prep School there these days. Now, it used to be in Staffordshire, but in 1973 it was reallocated to the next door county. I can't remember which one it is now. Is it Warwickshire? Anyway, so he came from a middle-class family, and his father was an Anglican clergyman, but not a particularly well-off one, because his parish didn't pay him that high a salary. The salaries of Anglican clergy varied enormously according to the parish. They could have a very large house. That's why often the grandest house in a village is called the old rectory, the old vicarage. In the 20th century, the Church of England often sold them off, often split up into about 5 flats. Anyhow, so then he won a scholarship to Clifton College, which was then considered on the edge of Bristol. Now it's definitely inside Bristol. It's in very close to Clifton Suspension Bridge. His contemporaries were Francis' young husband, the future conqueror of Tibet, and indeed Douglas Haig, the future Field Marshal. The only other famous person who went there was John Cleese. Obviously, well, John Cleese was born the year he died, so they didn't overlap. He was actually made head boy of the school, because he was noted for his outstanding academic ability, and he was pretty good at sport as well. Got popular with the schoolfellows, well behaved, but not so well behaved that he lost the respect of his classmates. Anyway, from there he went to Oxford University. I forget which college he went to actually, but having graduated, he decided he wanted to read for the bar. Like so many talented youths, he was called to the bar. He practiced at the bar. He married a young lady who was from the Duckworth family, Edwina, as in Duckworth, the publishing house which bears their name. They published particularly school textbooks, in those days often in Latin and Greek, and a duck is their symbol, surprise, surprise. So they had a son and a daughter in that order, who both lived to a great age. 2 children wasn't very many. This is possibly explained by the fact that his wife had a long-term lesbian relationship with her first cousin. Incest, indeed. Now, Henry wasn't jealous, because then he started having an affair with the cousin, and so there was this bizarre menage a trois, but nobody was jealous. They all felt they had their rational passion. Obviously, the very buttoned-up Victorian era, they had to keep this a closely guarded secret. Oh, my wife's cousin's saying coming to stay. Nothing untoward about that, even though there's a lot of bed hopping going on. Anyway, so Vitae Lampada he published in 1892, and it refers back to the Sudanese campaign of 1885, when Chinese Gordon was in Khartoum, and he was fighting the Mahdiist revolt. Now, Chinese Gordon had that name because he'd campaigned in China in the Taiping Rebellion, hired by the Chinese emperor. But in this case, he was working for the Khedive, or King of Egypt, because Sudan was officially part of Egypt, and Egypt's a 90% Muslim country, and but the Mahdists had revolted in Sudan, claiming that the Mahdi was a reincarnation of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him. So now, of course, they'd be regarded as heretics, because he wasn't the reincarnation of the Prophet Muhammad. And anyway, the King of Egypt had abolished slavery even in Sudan, but they couldn't possibly have this outrageous act of injustice. So the Mahdi has said that enslaving people is absolutely acceptable. It was grossly immoral to set slaves free, according to the Mahdeists. There's no doubt that Gordon was fighting in a lawful cause, in a moral cause. And almost all the men under his command were Muslims as well. So I don't want to tell too much about the story, but he's sort of cut off in Khartoum and besieged and asking for help. Should the British government help him? It's not our problem. Okay, he's working for the Egyptians, he's not working for us. Sorry, you're a soldier, you know you can get killed. Why should lots of our men get killed to save one guy? And they eventually, Gordon was helped. Well, Gladstone, the Prime Minister, sent British troops, but it was too late. Arrived a few days after Khartoum had been stormed and been killed. You should see the 1972 film starring Charlton Heston in the title role about Gordon of Khartoum. So Gladstone, being the grand old man, turned her into the murderer of Gordon for not saving him in time, but because he was fired by this Christian zeal. Gordon, even though most of his troops were non-Christians, but they've been fighting there, and obviously the British Army had state-of-the-art weaponry like Gatling guns and so on and squares. But Vita Lampadai is comparing sport to warfare. Say, play up, and play the game, being the crucial line. I can't remember the poem really saying, oh my God, there's a breathless hush in the close to night, 10 to make, and whatever the light is failing. And it goes on to say, the desert sand is sodden red with the blood of the square that broke. The regiments, the colonel is dead and the regiment's blind with dust and smoke. So referring to one of these battles, Abu Klea, when the British square was broken. So they would form themselves up in a square formation, so they, in a sense, you can't be attacked from the rear, there is no rear, they're facing out in all directions and using their firepower against the Mahdist, as in the Sudanese insurgents, which usually worked. They had Gatling guns and things like that. So it says it thrice in that poem, play up and play the game. Was he jingoistic? Some people find this distastefully chauvinistic these days. And when the First World War came, he was part of the British government propaganda department, blazoning forth the Allied cause and trying to tarnish the reputation of Britain's foes. He was an advisor to the Liberal government on Irish affairs. I'm not sure why. So far as I know, he never set foot in Ireland, but he thought that Home Rule ought to be granted, that it was becoming a bit too late by the time his advice was being heeded. What else? So yeah, and then he was fascinated by Drake, and he wrote a famous poem about Drake in Devon slang, written a sort of accent they would speak in Devon. That's the southwest county of England that Sir Francis Drake came from, the famous 16th century and 17th century sea captain. Anyway, he died in 1938, Sir Henry Newbolt. His work is not read very much these days, so that poem I mentioned, Vitae Lampada, is by far the most famous one, read far more than probably anything else he ever wrote. So he lived in somewhere else, Victoria Road, Kensington, which is quite close to here as well. And then when he died, he's buried in the Duckworth family estate in Somerset. So that is just a little bit about Sir Henry Newbolt. So follow me on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook, and book online lessons with me in history, politics, religious studies, English literature, English as a foreign language, French law, and get me to translate for you from French, Spanish, Italian, German, not Portuguese, sorry, Russian and Romanian. And is there anything else? Yes, well, I'll help you with any theses or dissertations, and I shall be your tour guide in Londinium whenever tourism reopens. Toodle pip.